Good afternoon and welcome back to Live at the Museum. My name's Penny Vale and I work here at the National Museum in the Lifelong Learning team, and today we're at our Mitchell repository and I'm joined by our Defining Moments curators Libby Stewart and Craig Middleton. We're going to be talking about rapid response collecting. Before we get into that, I would, as always, like to perform an acknowledgement of country. We're filming today on the lands of the Ngunnawal, Ngunnawal and Ngambri people of Canberra. I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to any and all First Nations people here present and watching via the live stream. So, as I mentioned briefly, we're talking about rapid response collecting, and I'm here with our Defining Moments curators. First up, I'm going to ask Libby to introduce herself and talk a little bit about what the Defining Moments project is. Hi Libby, it's lovely to have you here.
Thanks Penny, it's great to be here. So my name's Libby Stewart. I'm the curator that heads up the Centre for Defining Moments in Australian History. With the Defining Moments program, we focus on events, large and small, but moments in time in Australian history which tell us something larger. So we'll use a moment to tell the story of a larger issue or event or person, and we write up really great information about them and put them on our Defining Moments website, so it's all online for everyone to use. And it's a fantastic program. We also do lots of collecting, which is why we're here today as well.
It's also sort of crowdsourced Defining Moments, isn't it? People can submit their own through the Defining Moments website.
Absolutely. There's a very easy way to do that, and we welcome any and all suggestions for people's Defining Moments.
That's fantastic. So Craig is also on the Defining Moments team, but can you tell us a little bit about rapid response collecting, since that's what we're talking about today? Also introduce yourself to everybody, Craig.
Of course. My name's Craig Middleton, and I'm a curator at the National Museum, and I work with Libby in the Centre for Defining Moments in Australian History. And at the moment, I'm also responsible for collecting around COVID-19, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Rapid response collecting is an approach to collecting that is really looking at collecting history as it happens, or history in real time. And it can sort of be split up into categories. One is cause-based collecting, so that's looking at political and social issues, and we might collect those histories at protests and rallies. We can collect histories from natural disasters, from conflicts and other sites of trauma, from elections. That's another big one, thinking about the issues and the ephemera, the material culture that's produced from elections. And finally, just general popular culture. So that might be the posters that are handed out at club events and music events that often don't get archived officially. So that's kind of the broad understanding of how we identify rapid response collecting.
Thank you so much, both of you, for being here today. We've got a video that talks a little bit about some of the rapid response collecting, I suppose, projects that are happening in the museum at the moment, which we'll play in just a second. As always, if you have any questions, please pop them in the live stream. Don't wait until we come back, because we'd love to be able to answer as many of your questions as possible. We'll be right back.
What's really exciting about Love Wheels is that it seems to have taken on a life of its own since we chained it up outside the PM's house back in October. When the postal survey started, I decided I wanted to make a small contribution to the marriage equality debate. I already had the bike from another installation, so when I was at Lincraft and found this rainbow yarn, I thought, yes, a rainbow bike. For me, the marriage equality debate wasn't about the legal institution of marriage. It was about love. It was about equality. It was about compassion and humanity.
I think for many of us, it will always be an enduring symbol of that extraordinary day when marriage equality was achieved.
made such a massive difference, and today I'm here to stand with the other thousands of people that have also made a massive difference and want change for our environment and the future of our planet.
A big part of our response has been to set up testing centres. There are two main ones, one at Western Creek Walk-in Centre and this drive-through one here. Having a big testing service like this and like the one at Western Creek enables us to continue to ensure that we're not getting immunity transmission and that we can quickly respond to any outbreaks if they should occur. Initially people were extremely anxious. It was, you know, an unfolding situation that was strange to all of us, and people were really concerned about their health. It was really good that they were able to come here and talk to the nurses who are extremely knowledgeable, and to a large extent I think we were able to allay people's fears. We wanted people to have as much information as they could and to feel as comfortable as they could while they were waiting for their results.
It's a terrible time for everyone, and after fire engine, I just thought, you know, we've got to try and do something.
It was my dad's idea to put the fridge out there so that the fireys could get a cold drink on their way through. The amount of people that stopped, the fireys that stopped to grab that little treat out the fridge, covered in soot, covered in, you know, ash at the end of the day, at the end of the shifts, tired and weary. It was amazing. There's heaps of messages on the fridge that the public and the firefighters have left. We initially, I think, put a message out saying, can you guys please leave messages for the fireys and stuff? But then the fireys started leaving messages. They were like putting their dates and the crew they came from.
And it just made people just feel like they're doing something. So it made them feel a bit happier inside. Like these guys were going out and doing what they do, and you know, they're heroes, because I couldn't never do that. So, you know, whatever we could do, we could do.
It's certainly a really interesting space to be working in. Just before we start jumping into the conversation, I wanted to let everybody at home know when you hear the cracks, don't worry about it. It's just a bit windy here, so you can hear the building shifting around, but it's fine. We're all perfectly safe. It's just a little bit noisy. So what we might jump in with for rapid response collecting, Libby, can I ask you, why is rapid response collecting important?
It's really important for museums to stay relevant and deal with contemporary issues, because people in the future will want to know what was the significance, why was an event important, and rapid response collecting allows us to approach and collect a diversity of voices and objects and opinions about an event that's happening now. And diversity is so important. Australia is a very multicultural society, and we have a lot of people with different perspectives, and at the museum we're interested in collecting opinions from right across the spectrum, whether it's political or social issues or whatever's going on at the time. It's really important that we reflect what the discussion was at any particular time, and rapid response collecting really enables us to target different groups and individuals and collect that diversity, which is just so critical to us.
So that's a little bit different to the collecting from the distant past. I know you've got some really interesting thoughts on this, Craig. So how is that different to collecting items from the more remote past?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess when we think about building the collections we have in museums and the histories we have, it's like piecing together a puzzle. So if we're thinking about histories from the 1800s and early 1900s, all those pieces have been scattered. So what we might do first is do some research in terms of reading books, journal articles, going back to source documents. Now, when we're doing rapid response collecting, that research doesn't exist yet, or it's only emerging. It's existing in the media, in the public memory and consciousness, and so we need to sort of approach it slightly differently. I guess something else to consider is when we're collecting from the past, we often know what we want to collect and we're trying to find it, or we've identified it and we're going out to get it. When we attend an event at which we're going to do some rapid response collecting, we don't necessarily know what we want yet, because we want to be in the moment. We want to get a sense of what's happening around us, the key issues, the feeling. We're going to talk to those key people that we see sort of showing leadership in those moments. And so it's very different. And we don't just go and take everything we see and take it all back to the museum. It's about identifying potential opportunities to collect and build our national collections. So it's about connecting with those people, sharing information, and then going back and having a look at all the possibilities and working out what is going to be best to tell that story.
It certainly seems like a massive undertaking. And given how quickly the world changes, how do organisations, particularly the National Museum, how do we identify the events and issues that we are going to do contemporary collections on? I might start with you, Craig, is that okay?
Yeah, of course. So I guess it's about, so I was talking about that research element that we might do if we were looking at the distant past. So when we're thinking about collecting history as it happens, we're looking at the media agencies and the reports coming out. We're talking to people about what's going on, and we're getting a sense of the important issues. And I guess a good example of that is the global climate strike that happened last year, 2019 in September. Climate activism has been happening for a really long time, and this was the culmination of something. There was something in the air, the media were reporting on it, so it seemed really a significant moment in our history to be looking at and documenting. And I guess, the way we do that is by, jumping on social media and talking to the people who are making public commentary on this. That's one of the ways in which we do that.
That's fantastic. We also use Facebook groups, is that right?
Yeah.
Which has been a really interesting part of that. How do you collect for something like COVID-19 when we're not able to travel?
So COVID-19's, really interesting, because we're very much in the thick of it. And so we are restricted on travel, even still with border closures. And we're not going to send people out to discuss challenging histories with people at a time when we need to be looking after ourselves and our museum community, and also the people we're speaking to. So what the museum decided to do was to launch a Facebook group. And Facebook's a very accessible platform through which people already share their experiences. So it was about positioning the museum as a place for people to share that and then connect with people who they might not usually connect with online, and talk about their shared experiences. Now, the Facebook group has created a timeline of what's happened over the past few months. So some of the early posts, we were seeing photos of empty supermarket shelves and the great toilet paper crisis that emerged out of Australia. And actually we're seeing some of that content come back again. We saw people documenting how their working from home setups looked like, how they were homeschooling their children, through to some really brave people who were sharing stories of loss, of how if they contracted the virus and how that was making them feel. So social media is a really great platform to create a timeline of this moment that will become a research tool for our historical practices that we undertake in museums.
We also have a Facebook group that covers off the 2019-2020 bushfire season, don't we? Libby, you've been engaged in that quite heavily, haven't you?
Yeah, so that's the other really big focus area for our collecting at the moment, as well as COVID, is around the 2019-2020 bushfire season, because of course it affected just about everyone in the country. And so it's been really important to connect initially in person before COVID happened, and we were able to connect with a couple of communities in person, but then through the Facebook site Fridge Door Fire Stories, where we've had some really extraordinary footage of fires and from people who are engaged in firefighting, actually on their phones, and taking really quite confronting but really interesting footage and photos, and telling their stories and just sharing that with us, which has been fantastic. So that social media aspect of all of the collecting that we're doing at the moment is so critical, and will continue to be so into the future, as far as I can see.
I think it's also interesting to think about that social media connects us to people whom we might not connect with if we undertook the usual processes. We might be going to the more profiled people, those speaking publicly at events, and social media really connects us across what is a really vast continent and a vast country, and allows us to really hone in on those unremarkable moments in people's lives, which actually for me are some of the most powerful, and they resonate with the majority of people. And I think that's the power of social media these days, is that we can connect in that way.
That's a really great point, Craig, and it also not only nationally but internationally enables us to connect as well. And a story that I've really has resonated with me with the bushfires has been the stuffed koalas that were placed on lampposts and signs, first in New York City and then London. And so we've reached out to the people who organised that campaign. There were koalas that were put up with little notes on them, encouraging people overseas to donate to wildlife rescue and wildlife organisations here in Australia, and it was a really successful campaign. So we've reached out to those and have great hopes that we'll be able to bring one of those koalas into the collection to be able to tell that story of the international concern and dismay over the extent of the bushfires over that period.
We're starting to get some questions coming in through the live stream, which is great. Carolyn would like to know, we've talked a little bit about this, but I'm sure we've got a bit more to say. How do we, or do we, stay connected with the communities and people that we collect from or engage with? Can I send this one to you first, Libby?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Caroline. Thanks for that. One of the communities that we've connected, and I sort of alluded to it earlier with regard to the bushfires, was not far from Canberra, the small town of Cobargo on the New South Wales south coast, which was very badly affected by fires. A lot of buildings in the main street were burnt, and also its local payphone, the Telstra payphone in the main street, was burnt. And we reached out to Telstra to see if they would agree to donate it, which they have done, and it's now a part of our National Historical Collection. But aside from that, actually a really important part of that process was going down to Cobargo, which we did in February before we were shut down and we couldn't travel, to talk to people and see how they were faring and see if we could offer support and assistance and let them know that we're available to sort of tell their stories and and if they have objects that they would like to lend us or to give to us, that we could tell their stories. And we've, even through COVID, we've sort of kept connected with them, and now that we're able to travel a bit more again, we'll renew those relationships, because it's so critical. People need to trust us. We don't want to take advantage of people's grief and the situation they've been through, but we do want them to know that we're here and we're available to tell their stories if we can.
Bronia would like to know, this is for you, Craig, what sort of objects are we collecting for COVID? So you talked about some of the digital collections that we're doing, but what's the material culture we're collecting around COVID-19?
That's a really good question, and I think I sort of alluded to earlier when I was talking about the climate strike, that what we tend to do with rapid response collecting is to identify a lot of material and a lot of history, stories and objects before we go ahead and collect. And I think that's actually really crucial right now, because we are still in the pandemic. It hasn't, left us. So we need to be careful that we don't collect too early and have objects that might not be so significant later on. Otherwise we might, have lots of toilet paper rolls in collections. And unless that toilet paper has, a national story, I'm not sure it fits within our collecting. But if it did, we would collect everything from face masks through to maybe someone has a dog leash that they walked their dog on. It was the only time they could get out of the house that day during lockdown, and just holding that leash and going for that walk was a really significant moment for them during the day. And I'm sure that resonates with a lot of us and our Victorian friends who are some of whom are having to lock down again. Those it could be anything from really obvious objects to things that are a little bit more abstract.
Sandy would like to know, I'm going to start with Libby here, I think, what's the most interesting or unusual moment that you've collected from?
Well, I was just thinking with the fires, one of the very first events that happened actually relates to an object which all of our viewers will be able to see behind us here, the humble fridge. But I'm actually now going to throw to Craig here, because he had more to do with this collecting than me. But it's an unusual object. It's got a great story.
Yeah, so the Bungendore fridge, so it's got a name, the Bungendore Fireys fridge, and it was actually the first object that we collected, as we were coming out of the 2019-2020 bushfire season, and it's such a humble offering by a local family in Bungendore. Bungendore's located on the King's Highway, which is the main highway out of Canberra to the South Coast beaches. And so when the King's Highway was closed, the Hooper family put this fridge out on the side of the road, filled it with cold drinks and icy poles, and wrote one simple message on the door, which was free icy poles. And later that day, two volunteer firefighters took an icy pole. They took it to their fire truck and they snapped a photo of themselves, which later ended up on the Bungendore community Facebook page. And, from there, it kind of went viral. And so people began dropping off supplies to this fridge. It's a modest offering to say, hey, to the firefighters, we're thinking about you, we want to offer you something. But what happened is that people started leaving messages of support and hope on the fridge, and when fire crews stopped, they started signing their names and where their brigade was from. There's the New Zealand crew have left their mark, there's crews from the USA, there's crews from Tasmania, and they've all left their mark on there. And it's become what you can see behind us, which is a really beautiful community grassroots offering to this, what was a really traumatic experience. And I think, but it's a national story too. So it's very local in its context, but these acts of kindness were happening all over the country. And that's what makes this object so special and so powerful.
It was a really strong community symbol, actually. And as a member of the Lifelong Learning team, I don't often get to be involved with the collection of objects, but this one behind us, the community got so involved with the collection of the object that they drove it down the highway from Bungendore on 32 RFS trucks. Well, it was on one truck and there were 31 trucks behind it. Having the community be so involved was quite incredible.
Yeah, it's really important too. So what happened was that when the fridge came off the road, people were asking where it went, why wasn't it there anymore? And it was intended to be donated to the local Bungendore RFS brigade unit, but they thought the fridge was too special to be put in the back of the brigade unit for no one to see. So they offered it to the museum, and we were really excited. The Bungendore community was really excited. And then the radio station was really excited, and they were the ones that, you know, worked really closely with us to help us get this here. You know, we had to cross state territory borders with fire trucks. We got police escorts down the main Northbourne Avenue in Canberra, and arrived to an event of you know, over 300 people there to say thank you to the emergency services volunteers. So it was a really important moment. It was community led, and as a National Museum we had to respond to that.
It was well worth getting up at 3 a.m. for, and I'm really not a morning person. David would like to know, he first of all has a comment that the bushfire fridge is an amazingly personal focal point of the bushfires, but he's also curious about what else we might be looking to add to our collection from that event. I might toss this one to you initially, Craig, and see if what else are we looking at?
Yeah, I think we're looking for, you know, lots of things. I'm going to throw this one back to Libby because I think she's done a bit more work on it. But just initially, we know that, you know, there were fires in every state and territory. We know that the smoke produced from these fires impacted over 11 million Australians directly, and there was a level of anxiety across the country when this was happening. And so almost everybody in the country was impacted in some way. So I think, you know, we are looking for lots of different kinds of stories. But Libby probably has something to say about this.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So one of the aspects that we're really keen to address and interrogate, I guess, is the way that the different emergency services work together, and something that actually came out of the Bungendore Fridge event when all of the emergency services personnel were together. We had an approach from someone who works for the SES. And he offered us his entire SES uniform. He'd been out fighting fires, I think initially up in Queensland last year, and then had fought and worked with working with firefighting all the way down to the fires that were outside Braidwood, I think, in fact. But that relationship between the SES and the RFS, also the Country Fire Authority of Victoria, as well as another angle we're pursuing. But it's really important to show people, or to tell those stories about how those services all work so closely with each other, and how important that kind of communication angle is. And so, yeah, we're hoping to have Anthor's uniform for the collection, and then we'll be looking for other aspects as well, other personnel, if you like. They're very generous with the things that they're offering us, so we're pretty excited about that.
I think that's a key thing that's just been brought up with rapid response collecting, is that we can capture all the complexity and all the nuance that's part of these events. So we're not just looking at the firefighters, we're looking at the you know, everybody who's supporting them, the communities involved, and things that we might not find or that get lost down the track in even 10, 20, 30 years.
It's certainly a really interesting space for the museum to be operating in. We're coming to the end of our program today. We probably have time for a couple more questions, so pop them in so that we can get to them. We've got a question from Gavin, would like to know, how do you make sure you reach the stories of people who don't use social media? This probably is a really good one for you, Libby. You were talking about a fellow out in Cobargo who had some fantastic pieces just before we tuned into the live stream.
As we know, there's been huge media interest in the bushfires. They've been telling individual stories right the way through, and so more traditional forms of media like radio and television, where we talk to them as much as we can while they're interested in what we have to say, and they've been enormously supportive. And so there's a potter outside Cobargo, and ABC were very interested down there to tell his story, and I was able to go down and be part of that and talk about our interest in those particular kinds of stories. And just even a short TV 10, 20 second spot on ABC News can spark a number of different stories and different offers, and so we're very grateful for that kind of exposure, if you like, and it enables us to use those more traditional forms of media. But we also very much target groups and organisations ourselves. We use formal and informal networks via email, phone calls, and we actually approach people and ask them directly for stories and for collections.
And so that's a good point to mention that the social media angle is only one approach. It's not the whole approach, but it's using the tools available to us at the time. It's connecting in a way that if we had to build something else like a website, that would take a lot longer. Sometimes we have to, we don't always get those radio spots, there's lots of, line up for those spots. So it's really, it's one approach, it's not the only approach.
Norma would like to know, how do we manage the trauma associated with contemporary events like the 2019-2020 bushfires? Can I might start with Craig on this one, because I know you've done some really interesting work around that.
Yeah, so it's a really great question, because often, particularly with bushfires, but also with COVID-19, we are dealing in sites of trauma, some really devastating impacts. And I think what we don't do is we're not going to go out, just as the fire's extinguished and try get these stories off these people when they're feeling their most vulnerable or, they're most angry, whatever their feeling is. We need to give them time to process. We need to know what's going on. We need to have identified people, but we're not going to go straight to them because we don't want to re-traumatize them. So it's really about being really critically reflective on our own actions and making sure we're thinking about how we're doing what we're doing and the purpose of it, so that we don't just rush in to grab a story. We are museum professionals, we're collecting professionals, and we can take our time to ensure that we don't harm people.
We've got a great question from Nigel, who would like to know about the bike. Yes, it is there for a reason. I might throw that question initially to Libby. Can you tell us a little bit about the bike that's behind us?
Yeah, I'd love to tell you about the bike. So the bike relates to the marriage equality campaign and debate of 2017, and it was created by what she describes herself as a yarn bomber, Eloise Murphy in Sydney. In the lead up to the end of the survey into whether Australians wanted to change the Marriage Act, she decided to get some rainbow wool and covered the bicycle. And then because Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister at the time, and Eloise decided that really what the issue at its very heart, it was about love. And that Malcolm and Lucy's Turnbull's marriage was also very much a love story. So she wanted to reflect that on the bike, and so she's taken, she's collected images of the Turnbulls together throughout their married years and attached them to the bike. And then she actually locked the bike to a pole outside the Turnbull's residence in Sydney as a statement of love and what she felt was a really important thing to say about that debate. The Turnbulls rescued the bike. They were worried about it being destroyed in weather or by people, and took it into their garage. And over a series of conversations, they said, look, this is something that really needs to be in a collection. I think it really touched Lucy Turnbull. She was really, really pleased with it and thought, no, it's too important, it should be somewhere. So, they approached the museum, and we, of course, were absolutely thrilled to accept it into the collection later in 2017. And then it was on display, I believe, for some time in an exhibition. Yeah, it's a great object.
Yeah, it's a fantastic piece. It's one of my favourite pieces in the museum. And I also love the terrible joke that Eloise Murphy, who is the yarn bomber, calls herself treble maker because she does everything in a treble crochet stitch. So there's a joke for anybody who's into yarn craft watching via the live stream. We're coming to the end of the program today, unfortunately. We can't get to any more questions. If you have questions we haven't addressed, or if you're not watching live, please put them in the public comments under the video, and we will get back to them later in the week. The museum is now open, which is really lovely, so we would love to see you down at Acton Peninsula. Our current exhibition is Endeavour Voyage, The Untold Stories of Cook and the First Australians, which is a lovely segue for me to say next week's program is actually an introduction to that exhibition with our curators Shona, Ian and Lily. So please do tune in next week and I'll leave you with a quick introduction to that program. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining me, Libby and Craig. We'll see you all next week.